We often get at Globus the question, I'm thinking about using Globus on my campus, but I'd like to know more about how Globus will allow me to let people at other universities or other campuses access data on my systems. Or sometimes it'll get posed as, I heard that Globus does federated logins. Can you show me how Globus uses federated identities so that people can access data, maybe using identities from another system? And so the question gets posed a lot of different ways, but really what it seems to come down to for most people is how do I configure access to my endpoint so that the people I want to be able to access it can, and the people I don't want to be able to access it can't? It really is the case that moving data between campuses, from one campus to another, or from a system on another campus to yours, or from your campus to somebody else's, does seem like a complicated problem. And the reason it seems complicated is because every storage system that's connected to Globus has its own set of local people who have local accounts on the system. Either they're local to the campus or they're local to the computing center where the storage is. And if you're transferring from your computing center or your campus to somebody else's or vice versa, there's at least two different counting systems that could be involved in that transfer. And so even if I'm fortunate enough to have an identity at both endpoints, in other words, somebody at another campus has given me an account, and I have my local account here, even then I might have a different username on the other system than I do on my system. So how does Globus handle that? How does it make it so that I can actually set up a transfer from one system that has one set of accounts to another system that has a totally different set of accounts? And then you might think it's even more complicated because Globus itself is a service. And we know that there are hundreds of thousands of people who already have Globus accounts, or they use Globus. And so does that mean that there's a third accounting system involved in every single transfer? Oh my gosh, that sounds really complicated. Well, the good news is that in practice, we've designed things such that everybody's job is manageable. To begin with, researchers everywhere are able to log into Globus using existing identities. That means that you don't even have to create a new account in order to log into the Globus system. You can probably use one that you already have, either at a campus or the research institute that you belong to, or maybe some organization that you belong to, or maybe a national system that you use like Compute Canada or the Exceed system in the United States. You can log into Globus using an identity that you already have with one of those systems. And then you can also link identities from other organizations into a single profile or single Globus account. And then furthermore, you can even create and manage groups of individuals in Globus that maybe have people in a research collaboration or have people in a particular project. And you can use those in Globus to control access. Okay, so that's getting access to Globus itself. As a storage provider, you also are able to define local accounts on your system. This is something that you did before you had Globus, and Globus works with the accounting system that you already have. So as the administrator of a system that you make available via Globus, you have controls that you can set in Globus to define the local accounts via the normal accounting systems that you use, to tell Globus what method to use for logging in to your Globus system, and then also for controlling what people can do once they are authorized to use your system. People who you authorize to use your endpoint then have the ability to do something called creating a guest collection, which is a way of extending limited guest access to colleagues who don't have accounts on your system to allow them to access data that they have on your system. So basically, there are roles, there are things that different people can do. Researchers can log into Globus. You, as the administrator of a system, can hook up your accounting system to Globus. And then people who you've given access to your endpoint can extend access to other people. So everybody has something that they do in this model. Here's a picture of what I was just describing. So we've already done this. We've created Globus, the Globus web application and the Globus system that allows researchers to log in using existing identities. People can create profiles that have linked identities from several organizations in Globus, and people can create Globus groups. For every single endpoint, there must be a local administrator who is responsible for defining who are the local users of this endpoint. How do people prove that they're one of those local users? And what can those local users do once they've authenticated to the system? So that's what you, as the administrator of the endpoint, are responsible for doing. And then if you authorize it, the people who are local users of your system can further create guest collections that provide access to other people in the research universe. So the rest of this presentation is going to walk through how you'd actually do each of those things. In particular, how you do the things that you as the administrator of a Globus endpoint would do. As the administrator of a Globus endpoint, you have some specific concerns. First of all, how do you set up your local accounts? The usernames, home directories, access permissions, etc. Second of all, how do people authenticate to your Globus endpoint? In other words, how do they prove that they're the owner of one of those local accounts? The third thing is, who will I allow to create guest collections on my endpoint? And will I even allow guest collections on my endpoints? And if I do, what parts of my endpoint will I allow to be shared by those authorized people? There's another concern that you may have, which is, well, when somebody logs in to Globus from my institution, my campus, or my computing center, what is their identity going to look like? Are they going to be, some random person at globusid.edu or .org? Or is it possible that they could be a username like lliming at uchicago.edu, if, let's say, I'm at the University of Chicago, so that it's easier for other people to find them. They use something that looks like the email address. So, can I make it so that my local users can log in with their campus identity, and that's what it looks like when they're in Globus? And that would allow other people to easily share things with them. I need to note that for high assurance endpoints, if you are a campus that has a high assurance or a HIPAA BAA subscription with Globus, this is important because it actually, you need to have an institutional ID in order for you to use a high assurance endpoint. So that's also a concern. So I'm going to step through each of those four things now in turn and walk through how each of those is done. So first of all, we look at managing local accounts. So the important message that you need to know is that Globus Connect Server uses the local account system that you already have to identify and authorize local users. So you are free to set up users on your account any way that you normally would on a Linux system on your campus. You can use basic Linux accounts. You could use Azure Active Directory. You could use LDAP. You can use the PAM system. That's a Linux thing, pluggable authorization or authentication modules. You can use any of those things to set up your local accounts. If you have an account tool or account management tool that you use, you can go ahead and continue using that. And Globus will use those local accounts. As long as the local accounts are visible to the standard Linux get PW function calls or system calls, Globus Connect Server will do the right thing with those accounts and will recognize those local accounts and all the permissions that you give to those accounts. So you can use any account management tool you like to manage your local accounts. The next concern was, how do people prove that they are one of those local people when they're using Globus? So there are, this is where things get a little bit more complicated, because we actually have a couple different versions of Globus Connect server that people are using right now. And the answer is slightly different depending on which of those you're using. Globus Connect Server version 4 provides two different ways that local users can, what we call, activate an endpoint. That's another word for log into the endpoint. We don't use that because it gets confused with logging into Globus, which is something different. So what are the two different ways? First of all, you could use local system authentication, where when somebody comes to your endpoint, Globus takes them to a login page, and your endpoint validates those logins against your local account database. So that would be authenticating against the local Linux account database. To do that, when you install Globus Connect Server version 4, you would choose the OAuth method. And what happens then is that your Globus Connect server configures a local service that provides that login page. And you can actually customize the login page, like is shown up here in the upper right-hand corner of my slide. This is Mississippi State University. They put their banner at the top of their login page. They changed the title and provided some instructions. And so they basically customize things so that when people come to their Mississippi State University endpoint, it looks familiar to them, and they can enter the local username and password that they would use on that system. The second option that people can use when up to or that you can configure for people to authenticate to your endpoint is campus authentication. In that case, Globus would take the user to your campus login service, and whatever username is returned by the campus is used as the local username on your endpoint. To do that, you would, when you're installing Globus Connect Server 4, you would choose the CI logon option, and you would have to tell Globus what your campus's domain is. So for example, stanford.edu or umich.edu or uchicago.edu or whatever it might be. And again, in that case, you don't even need to set up a login system or login page on your endpoint, because it uses the campus login service. So those are basically the two options you have. You can either have your own login page that uses the local usernames and passwords on your Linux system, or you can use your campus authentication, and it will tell your system what the user's username is, and that's what will get used on the system. So that's for Globus Connect Server version 4. For Globus Connect Server version 5, there's currently only one option, which is the campus option. But it's a little bit more flexible with Globus Connect Server version 5 than it was with version 4. With Globus Connect Server version 5, your users have to have an identity from your campus among their linked identities. So they can log in using whatever organization they want to, as long as they have, for example, a stanford.edu, if you're at Stanford, identity linked among their linked identities. And the campus username is what's used to determine the username on the local account, but there are 3 different ways that can be done. First of all, the simplest way is that the local system uses the campus username. So if your usernames are synced with the campus system, this is the easiest way to do it. You just tell Globus, whatever the campus login service returns, that's going to be the campus username, or that's going to be my local username on my system. The second option is that you can use a pattern to transform the campus username into the local account on the system. The third is that you can provide your own custom script that takes as its input whatever the campus login service returned and provides an output that is the username to use on the local endpoint. So you can configure things that way too. If, for example, you have a map file that has a mapping of every authorized account on your system to the campus username that that person has, you could write a very simple script that converts from the campus username to the local username. And that's also an option in Globus Connect Server version 5. Now, a future version of Globus Connect Server version 5 will also include that local username and password option that I mentioned for Globus Connect Server version 4. It's actually a little bit better than the way it was done in version 4. Again, it's more flexible, much like this campus option is more flexible in version 5 than it was in version 4, but we'll have to wait for a little bit longer for that option to be available in Globus Connect Server version 5. Right now, the only option that's available is to use the campus login service and use one of these three mapping options, either a direct mapping or a pattern or a script. All right, let's get to the third concern, guest collections. So what is a guest collection again? This is how people who don't have accounts on your system can be given a limited, secure guest access to specific parts of your, or specific data on your system. It's a folder or directory and its contents shared by an authorized local user with somebody else who's a known Globus person or a Globus group. We also sometimes refer to these as shares. So if you're more used to hearing people say, I have a Globus share on somebody's system, that's what they're talking about. They're talking about a guest collection. The important thing to know about this as an administrator of the system is that an individual on who's authorized to use your system can only share things to which they themselves have access. So they can't give anybody access to something they don't already have permission to. So it's important to know how this is controlled on your system. In Globus Connect Server 4, you configure which parts of the file system are shareable, that is, guest collections can be created for, and also which users and groups can create the shares. And that's done using the Globus Connect Server.conf file. So if you're a Globus Connect Server version 4 administrator, you know that everything on your system is administered using this config file. And the options in the config file allow you to specify what parts of the system are shareable, and also which users or groups can create shares. In Globus Connect Server version 5, every mapped collection on your system has its own setting for guest collections. So if you want parts of your system to be shareable and other parts of the system not to be shareable, you'll just create different map collections for each of those parts of the system. You'll create one map collection where guest collections are enabled, and you'll create another mapped collection where guest collections are not enabled. And you'll configure each of those to correspond to a different part of your system. In other words, a different file system on your system. Maybe one of them will be /projects and another one will be /users. Maybe another one will be /scratch, and you can set whether guest collections are enabled or disabled separately for each of those. So that's basically how guest collections are controlled on your system. You would do it either through the Globus Connect Server.conf file for version 4 or by creating mapped collections for version 5. All right, that final concern that I mentioned, what do your local users' identities look like? Can you make it so that they can log into Globus using your campus login service, and it'll look to other people like so-and-so at umich.edu or so-and-so at stanford.edu or usc.edu? Yes, you can do that. This makes it a lot easier for people at other campuses to share things with your local users, and so it's a good thing to do. If you're a high assurance, if you have a high assurance endpoint, then you really have to have this. It's something that's necessary because it basically is a more secure way to identify the people who have access to your system. And so we require that people use a campus login service for that. The first thing to do would be to check to find out if your organization's already listed. There are hundreds of them that already are, and so there's a very good chance that your university, maybe your research institute are already on our list. If they're not, then the best thing to do is probably to talk to your Globus representative. You can, I'll have a link at the on my final slide with information about how to contact the team to find out how to get added to that list. It does require participation by your campus login service team. And we know that this is usually a different group on your campus than the people who are installing Globus. And so you will need to reach out to your campus login service team and get them involved if you're not already on the Globus list of organizations that people can log in with. This is easier if your campus participates in a federation like InCommon or the EduGain federations around the globe. EduGain is kind of the worldwide federation of federations, and every country has its own participating federation. In the United States, it's called InCommon. Canada, Germany, the UK, they all have their own local federation. And again, your Globus representative can put you or your campus login service team in touch with the right organization. We do also have an option if you, for some reason, can't participate in a federation. We do have a subscription add-on that allows you to add another login service without participating in that federation. That's something else to check out. But that is how it works, and that's how you would get that set up. Let's see. So I want to remind you that our documentation is available. We have community mailing lists. There are a lot of different ways to get in touch with us. If you want to get in touch with your Globus representative, that would be the subscriber engagement team through outreach@globus.org. Send an email to them and we'll get you set up. Or you can browse our website, and there are forms there that allow you to contact people at Globus for more information too.